e4. Values were constant in many fields of endeavor at the time this game was played. Stories began, once upon a time. Tic-tac-toe players put a cross in the central square. Checker masters started with 11 to 15. Chess masters opened with 1, e4. Despite the researches of the scientists, these remain good beginnings. e5. Black opens lines for two of his pieces and establishes equilibrium in the center. f4. An offer of a pawn to induce black to surrender his share of the center. Accepting the gift enables white to continue with 3, knight f3, followed by 4, d4, and dominate the center with his pawns. In addition, the opening of the f-file will offer white the opportunity of directing his attack at the vulnerable point, f7. This is a tender spot whether black's king stays at home or castles. Bishop c5. Probably the safest way to decline the gambit. 1. The bishop bears down on the center and controls an excellent diagonal. 2. The bishop supplements the pawn's attack on d4, and prevents white from moving his d-pawn to d4. 3. The bishop's presence at c5, overlooking g1, forbids white from castling in a hurry. Knight c3. White avoids 3, f takes, e5, because the reply, coming like a shot, probably, 3, queen, h4, check, 4, g3, even worse is 4, king, e2, queen takes, e4, checkmate, 4, queen takes, e4, check, wins a rook for black. White's actual move is not as energetic as 3, knight f3, but in playing 3, knight c3, Blackburn was trying to lure his opponent into playing 3, bishop takes g1, 4, rook takes g1, queen h4 check, 5, g3, queen takes h2, when 6, rook g2, followed by 7, f take e5, gives white a fine game. Knight c6. A simple retort to the dubious invitation. Black continues mustering his forces on the field of action. In the fight for control of the center, his knight does its share by exerting pressure on the squares, e5, and d4. Knight f3. Did white miss a chance to win material by 4, f takes e5, knight takes e5, 5, d4? No, because 4, f takes e5, is met by 4, d6, whereby black offers a pawn for the sake of securing a free, easy development. The text move puts an end to the possibility of being bothered by a queen check and revives the threat of winning the e-pawn. E takes, f4. This is a poor move on at least 4 counts. 1. In moving a pawn instead of a piece, black loses sight of the chief objective in all opening strategy: move the pieces. Get them off the back rank and on the job. 2. He surrenders his hold on the center and the privileges it confers. 3. He wastes time capturing a pawn which he cannot retain. 4. He permits white to seize the center next move, which forces a retreat by his bishop and a consequent loss of time. Teresh considered a move such as the one just made by black a worse offense than an outright blunder, such as leaving a piece en prize. Instead of this, black might better have played 4, d6, which holds everything and lets the c8, bishop see daylight. d4. Of course. No player should take more than half a second to see the power of this pawn push. The pawn seizes control of a good bit of the center, occupying d4 and attacking 2 other important squares, dislodges the bishop from its strong position, and uncovers an attack by his own c1 bishop on the f4 pawn. Bishop b4. It would have been sounder strategy to retreat to e7 instead, where the bishop is invaluable for defense. Bishop takes, f4. White gains a tempo with this capture, as he recovers the lost pawn and develops a piece at the same time. d5. Black attacks the white e-pawn, disputing possession of the center. Meanwhile, Black gives his queenside pieces more air. e5. All pawn moves have positive and negative aspects. Teresh used to say, every pawn move loosens the position. One drawback for white in the advance of his e-pawn is that the occupation of e5 by a pawn deprives his pieces of a useful square. The knight especially operates to great advantage when posted at e5. In compensation, the pawn exercises a cramping effect on Black's entire position and imposes particular restraint on Black's king's knight, which cannot develop naturally at f6. Bishop takes, c3, check. Black is intrigued by the prospect of saddling Blackburn with a doubled pawn, but why capture a piece that is pinned and can do no harm? Why relax the pressure at all? A more commendable procedure was to bring up the reserves, starting with 7, bishop f5. B takes, c3. In return for the handicap of the doubled pawns, little enough, since the advance, c4, forces an exchange and undoubles the pawns, white enjoys advantages in his two bishops and in the open b-file which his rook will put to good use. Bishop e6. A superficial move, as the bishop could develop to greater effect at f5. There it would hinder white from freely posting his bishop at d3, except at the cost of permitting the bishops to be exchanged. Developing the pieces to squares where they are most effective assures an advantage, preventing the opponent from doing likewise increases it. It is important to fight for control of the vital squares. Bishop d3. Clearly an excellent deployment, the bishop reaches out in two directions, ready to take a hand on either side of the board. h6. Apparently to prevent 10, knight g5, or 10, bishop g5. White, who is interested only in completing his development, has not the slightest intention of making either of these moves. The move, h6, by black, or h3, by white, should be played only if the h-pawn is to form a base for an attack by pawns, i.e. if it supports an advance by the g-pawn. Defensively, the move does more harm than good, as it loosens the pawn structure and weakens its resistance to attack. It is especially dangerous if the king has castled on the kingside, as the pawn itself, standing out from the ranks, provides a convenient target. Also, as if the foregoing were not enough, it does nothing to further the cause of development and wastes time which should be devoted to the liberation of pieces which are still shut in. Castle kingside. At one stroke white secures the safety of his king and brings his rook on to an open file. It is true that the file is cluttered up by a knight and bishop, which interfere with the rook's influence, but they are pieces, not pawns, and can move quickly out of the way. Knight e7. Not the happiest spot for the knight, but how else can it get into the game? Poor as this development is, it is by far preferable to letting the knight stay uselessly at home. Rook b1. The master makes this move in a flash, while the run-of-the-mill player never even looks at it. What is the rook's future on this file? It attacks a pawn, but the pawn is easily protected. Why not try for a kingside attack, instead of this futile demonstration? The answer lies in this: the master's instinct, or perhaps his knowledge or experience, tells him that he must seize any files that are open, control them at once with his rooks or his queen. Make the moves, it says, that conform with the requirements of the position, and you will be suitably rewarded. Play the moves necessary to establish a superior position. Develop your pieces so that they enjoy maximum mobility, and control most of the territory. Direct your efforts to weakening the enemy position, cramping the movements of his pieces, and reducing the capacity of his resistance before you make the first move of a combination. When the time is ripe, the attack will play itself. The decisive combination will stare you in the face. B6. This too is a move that distinguishes the master from the amateur. How easy it is to advance the pawn, safeguard it from attack, and let the rook bite on granite. Obvious as this defense is, no top-ranking player would rush to adopt it. He would try to avoid disturbing the pawn formation and consider instead such alternatives as 11, rook b8, or 11, queen c8. After the actual move, the light squares on black's queenside have been weakened. More to the point, the advance of the pawn deprives the c6 knight of solid support, a circumstance that white will exploit in his forthcoming attack on the king, away over at the other side of the board. Queen d2. The queen leaves the first rank to enable the rooks to get in touch with each other. They may wish to increase the pressure on an open file by doubling on it, or otherwise work in concert. The full meaning of white's queen move might easily be overlooked by an opponent who makes plausible but superficial replies. Chess must not be played mechanically, even in the simplest, most placid positions. Castle kingside. Walking right into the teeth of the storm. Before making a move that suggests itself so readily, black might have asked himself, how can I exploit white's one weakness, the doubled pawns on the c-file? He might then have hit upon 12, knight, a5, with the object of swinging the knight to c4. There it blockades the doubled pawn, interferes with the free movement of white's pieces, and in general sticks like a bone in the throat. White could capture the knight, but then he parts with one of his valuable bishops, and as a result of the exchange his pawn position would be inferior to black's. Finally, black could then anchor one of his pieces to great effect on d5, a square from which it could never be evicted by pawns. Bishop takes, h6. Blackburn must have snatched this pawn up at lightning speed. At the price of a bishop, he immediately gets 2 pawns as material return, demolishes the barricade of pawns near the king, and more, as we shall see. G takes, h6. Black must capture the bishop, or be a pawn down without any positional compensation. Queen takes, h6. Let us see what white's return is for the piece that he sacrificed. 1. He has 2 pawns in tangible assets. 2. His queen is powerfully placed in enemy territory, threatening mate on the move, in fact. 3. He has ripped away the screen of pawns that sheltered black's king. 4. He has a strong attack in prospect, starting with 15, knight g5. 5. If more help is needed, he can call up the reserves, after 15, knight g5, by 16, rook f3, followed by 17, rook g3. Knight g6. Was there any other defense? 1. 14, knight f5, to interfere with the action of the bishop, then 15, bishop takes f5, bishop takes f5, 16, queen takes c6, picks up the unprotected knight on the queenside, a consequence of black's instinctive advance of his b-pawn at his 11th move. 2. 14, bishop f5, 15, bishop takes f5, knight takes f5, 16, queen takes c6, and again white scoops up the unfortunate knight. 3. 14, f5, leaves black's bishop en prize. White would capture it following Tartakower's excellent advice, take it first and philosophize afterward. Knight g5. Again threatening mate at h7. This is speedier than the brutal alternative 15, bishop takes g6, f takes g6, 16, queen takes g6 check, followed by 17, queen takes e6, which wins material, and eventually the game. Blackburn heeds the injunction laid down by Baron von Heydbrand und der Lasse, who flourished in the 19th century: the simplest and the shortest way of winning is the best way. Rook e8. The rook provides the king with a flight square. Rook takes f7. Again there is a pleasant choice of winning methods. Two others are 16, bishop takes g6, and if 16, f takes g6, then 17, queen h7 checkmate, and 16, knight h7, followed by 17, knight f6 check, and a quick mate. The move actually made nails down the king and renews the threat of mate on the move. Bishop takes f7. Forced, if black wants to avoid resigning. Queen h7 check. Nudging the king into a fatal situation. King f8. The only move. Queen takes f7, checkmate. The danger in playing plausible but perfunctory chess is finely illustrated in this game. Blackburn, who played this and 7 other games simultaneously while blindfolded, relied on order and method to achieve victory. It proved easily superior to the move-to-move groping of his sighted opponent.